like to do now is say a few words of introduction about our next keynote speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Claudia Fritsche. She is currently the Ambassador of Liechtenstein to the United States. She began her public career as the personal secretary to the Liechtenstein head of government from 1970 until 1974, and later to deputy head of government. Ambassador Fritsche joined the Office of Foreign Affairs of the Principality of Liechtenstein in 1978 and served in a variety of diplomatic functions, including Secretary to the Liechtenstein Parliamentary Delegations of the Council of Europe and to the European Free Trade Association, as well as within the Liechtenstein embassies in Bern, Vienna, and the permanent representation to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. Ambassador Fritsche served as the permanent representative of the Principality of Liechtenstein to the United Nations from 1990 until 2002, and served as Vice President and member of the General Committee of the United Nations General Assembly during its 48th session. From 1999 until 2002, she also served as the president for the International Association of Permanent Representatives of the United Nations, where she headed the Liechtenstein delegation at major UN conferences. Ambassador Fritsche's lecture topic today will be Liechtenstein, a small power using soft power. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a very warm welcome for Her Excellency Ambassador Claudia Fritsche. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have to admit, first of all, one thing that before receiving the invitation to speak to you today, I really did not know about the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. I was, however, impressed by the results of my research, and I congratulate ICD on its philosophy, mission, and what it stands for. ICD is making a most valuable contribution to help bridge the increasingly growing challenge which presents itself today to a successful interaction of societies and cultures. I know you've had a busy day. This was the first day of your conference. Your attention span may be waning. I'll try not to bore you, but I would like to share with you some thoughts that may be a bit different coming from the perspective of a comparably very small country. Much smaller than Lithuania, much smaller than Slovenia. Country the size of the District of Columbia, 60 square miles. Now, I'd like to give you a short overview of Liechtenstein and then speak to you about how we use soft power as a tool to practice cultural and public diplomacy. Liechtenstein has been in existence for almost 300 years. My country has survived difficult periods in Europe's history, and a special characteristic of Liechtenstein is actually its form of government. Located in the heart of Europe, my country is a hereditary monarchy on a parliamentary and democratic basis. This means that the sovereignty is embodied both in the people and in the reigning prince. The princely house of Liechtenstein, from which the country derives its name, is one of the oldest noble families in Europe. Liechtenstein became a sovereign state under international law in the year 1806. Since then, and especially in the last 60 years, the country has become a member of a number of international organizations, as you have heard: the UN, the Council of Europe, the World Trade Association, the European Economic Area, because we are not a member of the European Union, and the European Free Trade Association. We have maintained a customs and a currency union with our neighbor Switzerland since the 1920s, and the Swiss franc has been used since 1924 as our currency. The years after World War II were a major turning point in our history, as Liechtenstein was then transforming from a predominantly agricultural country, a country of farmers, to a very highly developed, industrialized country. And by the way, we do not have a military force. Liechtenstein abolished its military in 1868. A few remarks on our economy. The trademarks of the Principality are a free market economic policy, political stability, low taxes, and harmonious relations between employers and employees. We haven't had a strike in the last 60 years. Against the background of a resident population of 36,000, that's how many people live in Liechtenstein, the country provides over 34,000 jobs within its borders. Every day, that means that half of our workforce commutes from neighboring Switzerland, Austria, and also Germany into Liechtenstein. In addition, our companies provide another 33,000 jobs abroad, and that brings the total number of jobs created by the Liechtenstein economy to over 67,000. Contrary to what many think, the actual biggest contributor to our GDP is not financial services, it is a manufacturing industry. It contributes about 36% to our GDP, and financial services around 30%. You would actually find, surprisingly, that you are familiar with quite a number of what Liechtenstein companies produce. I give you 2 or 3 examples. No medium-sized and high building in the world, not only in the US, goes up without Liechtenstein manufactured tools to be used. Our biggest company, called Hilti, is one of the global leaders in producing fastening systems for the construction industry. Then we are, besides the US, Germany, and France, the world's largest producer of dentistry, artificial teeth, and everything that goes with it. On top of that, we produce a particular connector type for the entertainment industry, connectors that are widely used here in Washington on Capitol Hill, but also on the West Coast in Hollywood. We cover more than 50% of the US market demand for that particular connector. Now, rather than joining the European Union, Liechtenstein has been a member of the European Economic Area since 1995. The European Economic Area joins the 27 members of the European Union, with Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein in the internal market with about 500 million consumers. This is a decision that the 3 countries made in the early 90s. The decision has probably now come in flux because Iceland has applied for EU membership. Norway, for the time being, says it wants to stay outside under any circumstances, and our neighbor Switzerland doesn't have any aspirations. But at the same time, my government is preparing alternative scenarios. We never know what happens. We may have to revisit our position within the next 5 to 10 years. Let me say a few words about our perspective of how Washington and how embassies here in Washington work. There are close to 180 countries represented here with an embassy, and I'm saying close to 180 because a few countries have chosen to accredit their ambassador to the United Nations also to Washington on a non-resident basis. So that makes around 180. Some of them are in New York but don't have a physical presence in Washington. Those embassies and their diplomats face a somewhat different situation in DC in comparison to other capitals. First, we need to interact here with a great variety of stakeholders, starting with the executive branch, with Capitol Hill, and then, of course, continuing with the media, the academic and other educational institutions, the cultural institutions, and different non-state actors such as business and interest groups. Many ambassadors travel to other parts of the US, often because they have a sizable community of expats in particular parts of the US, but of course also to attract investments for their respective countries. Another reason for trips across the US is, of course, public diplomacy. All of us seek out opportunities to give talks, to inform about our country, meet with local authorities, as well as business and media representatives. Now, here in Washington, we are friendly competitors, but we are competitors. We have all been sent by our governments to gain the best possible access in order to effectively represent our country's interests. Establishing, maintaining, and enlarging a good network is the key to success. It is therefore obvious that we really don't have much time for each other. We all tried continuously to be an interesting partner, an interesting country, an interesting interlocutor for our host country, the United States. We compete for attention, for access, for influence, for media coverage. There is a growing international race in Washington to make a statement. Since it is becoming increasingly difficult to get senior politicians to accept embassy invitations, because you have to keep in mind that especially the members of Congress usually spend time in their constituencies over the weekend. They come to Washington on Tuesday morning. Very often, depending on the votes, they leave Thursday night. That gives them 3 days and 2 nights here, and embassies are not on top of their list. So we try harder than ever before to organize exciting events, to cater to local tastes, not serve our food, but serve hamburger sliders or anything that may appeal to them more than our national food. And we try to heighten our profile on a daily basis. Ideally, embassies are a hub for networking with the movers and shakers. Bigger embassies who have great facilities and whose countries are of particular political, economic, or strategic interest to the United States have a clear advantage. For the rest of us, in slightly exaggerated terms, I can say it's an uphill battle every day. Now, in my opinion, diplomacy per se has changed greatly over the last 2 decades. Diplomats are no longer the bringer of news to their governments. CNN and other media take care of that. Our role is to analyze, to make recommendations based on knowledge and experience gained in the host country, to reach out directly to the business community, the media, and to interest groups. The economic interdependence in today's globalized world has transformed the nature of diplomacy, that's for sure. Increasingly, and that is something new, governments, rather than appointing career diplomats, choose business people, academics, and educators to become their diplomatic representatives. So the ambassador here very often not only has to explain to the people in the host country why his or her country works this way and thinks this way and differs this way from the US, but we also have to explain to our people back home. We are sometimes translators between two cultures, and we have to explain to our people back home why Americans think differently. There is no need for me to elaborate on the meaning and importance of cultural diplomacy, but I nevertheless would like to stress that we have never had a greater need to enhance these efforts. We do live in a time where technological advancements have enabled us to connect, to reach out and react more easily and quicker than ever before. New forms of media, including social media, are now playing an increasingly important role in cultural diplomacy. They can promote democratic values, they break through censorships, and the new media forms engage people in unprecedented ways. Governments in all parts of the world are being challenged to become more transparent. Cultural and public diplomacy is also particularly relevant because I venture to say there is so much misinformation out there. Diplomacy, whether cultural or public or in the traditional form, allows for actors to gain information from a number of legitimate sources. And in times of changing headlines, real-time news that change by the minute, diplomacy does allow actors to cut through the static and background noise and use dialogue and discourse as a way of coming to real understandings and solutions. I'm sure you are familiar with the argument that cultural diplomacy does not have an immediate impact. I do, however, believe that no one would argue with the fact that cultural diplomacy is an essential element of diplomacy and international exchange. Now, there are obviously limitations for a small country like Liechtenstein to practice cultural diplomacy because we have, first of all, limited financial and personnel resources. We don't have internationally renowned artists, conductors, orchestras, ballets, neither are there famous fashion designers or movie stars that could be our cultural ambassadors. We cannot put on large-scale public relations campaigns, and there is no sizable, influential Liechtenstein expat community in the US that could help us. As a matter of fact, the total number of Liechtenstein expats in the US is less than 150. So, in our public diplomacy efforts, we do sometimes try to face people with facts about Liechtenstein that they are totally unfamiliar with. And that sometimes triggers an interest, and they are then compelled to learn more about the country. I'll give you a few of those facts. One, per capita, we are one of the most, if not the most, highly industrialized country in the world. And it is really only the per capita comparisons with which I can impress. The Liechtenstein princely family owns one of the largest and most precious private art collections in the world. The Liechtensteins have been collecting art for more than 300 years. Besides Germany, the United States is actually our largest trading partner. We are a society of entrepreneurs. Per 10 inhabitants, we have one active business. Our unemployment rate has remained consistently low for over the past years and is now around 2.5%. And in Liechtenstein, a very small country, the fourth smallest in Europe, still over 100 different nationalities live, amongst them about 50 US citizens. Now, despite limitations, we have a pronounced self-perception of who we are. We feel a distinct Liechtenstein identity. And we have a pronounced self-perception of which role in the international community we are striving for. Our foreign policy is defined along the following lines. The preservation of our sovereignty is considered, of course, an essential element. Because we lack the political and military power to assert ourselves, we have to rely on compliance with international law and the solidarity of the international community. For this reason, the focus of our foreign policy is, as you have already heard from my colleagues in their countries, it's the same. Our focus is on human rights, the progressive development of international law, development cooperation, and international humanitarian assistance. And of course, within the scope of our possibilities, we engage in the promotion of peace and security. Our choice is to use soft power in order to assert ourselves, and there is a wide range of possibilities, of course, to define the concept of soft power. We think that it is a tool to attract attention, exercise some influence when our very own interests are concerned, solidify our position as a reliable partner, and at the same time promote values that are dear to us. Let me give you some examples of our use of soft power here in Washington. My embassy maintains very good relations with Capitol Hill, which is an essential thing for every embassy here to do. And I am in the lucky position also to be able to bring members of Congress and also one group of staffers every year to Liechtenstein. And we even have our own Congressional Friends of Liechtenstein caucus, small, 18 members, but still. And by way of small projects and programs, we work with think tanks in Washington. We have a small program within CSIS, and we have another small program within SAIS. I myself make several trips a year to different parts of the United States to inform about Liechtenstein, to visit our companies, to meet local politicians, the governor of the state I visit, the mayor of the city I visit, and also occasionally interact with the very small Liechtenstein community that I might find in one pocket or the other. So far, I've been to 44 of the 50 states. The 6 missing, they're all in the Midwest, and I will go there. Then my embassy regularly hosts groups of students, special interest and professional groups. And I have to say, I'm also very lucky. It helps a lot. We came here in 2002, opened the embassy. We're in a variety of rental spaces. And now, since 3 years, we own a beautiful space in a building in Georgetown on the waterfront. It's a very contemporary building. It has a great view onto the Potomac. So it helps that we look a bit different than other embassies do. Most embassies came here 40, 50, 60 years ago. They tend to be either along Mass Avenue or nearby, and they are more often than not in more traditional buildings. So in Washington, it just helps to be different. We also host fundraisers for charity and cultural institutions in Washington. And there is one project that we are engaged with that is not in DC, that is in New Orleans. A Liechtenstein company, namely Hilti, some time ago donated tools to the St. Bernard project. The St. Bernard project rebuilds houses for victims of Hurricane Katrina. You may wonder whether 7 years after Katrina happened, this is still necessary. Yes, it is. So I myself and my small staff, we have been to New Orleans several times to volunteer, to help rebuilding homes, and we have become quite good at drywalling, sanding, cutting 2x4s, etc. I'd like to pick up on one of ICD's own initiatives, namely the Women's Rights Initiative, and I'd like to inform you about one of Liechtenstein's distinct foreign policy priorities within the human rights area. And this happens to actually be of great interest to the US as well, and we cooperate with the State Department. For many years, we have engaged ourselves and continue to do so within the UN in particular in the question of women, peace, and security. What is meant by that? Well, unfortunately, it's a well-known fact that women and girls are disproportionately and uniquely affected by armed conflict. In modern warfare, an estimated 90% of the casualties are civilians, and 75% of these are women and children. 80% of all refugees and displaced persons are women. Rape and sexual violence targeting women and girls are not only used to terrorize women, but also as strategic tools of war and instruments of genocide. 12 years ago, the United Nations Security Council adopted a groundbreaking resolution, Resolution 1325, which was the first formal and legal UN document that requires parties in a conflict to respect women's rights and to support their participation in peace negotiations. My government is making continued efforts to promote the implementation of this resolution, among other things, through the following contributions. We are an active member of the Friends of the Women, Peace and Security Group within the UN. Together with Switzerland, we supported the publication of the Women, Peace and Security Handbook. We made this handbook as an iPhone app possible. We co-financed and developed the monthly Women, Peace and Security action points for the Security Council. In February this year, we hosted a workshop in Liechtenstein on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Afghanistan. And on a somewhat different but related note, for quite a while, we have been advocating the secure access to fuels in humanitarian crisis. Displaced women and girls who are responsible for finding the cooking fuel to prepare meals for their families are often at risk. They face physical abuse and sexual assault when they go out to collect firewood, and they risk lung and other respiratory disease from inhaling cooking smoke in their small shelters. I'd like to conclude my soft power demonstration in practical terms by again referring to one of your own initiatives, namely the Corporate Cultural Diplomacy Initiative. Connected to our biggest company, Hilti, there is also the Hilti Family Trust. which has and continues to support a number of very distinct activities, and I'll give you 3 examples. Legendary places like the ancient port of Alexandria in Egypt, with remnants of the royal quarter, the lost city of Heraklion, and parts of the city of Canopus were rediscovered by expert divers some years ago in the depth of the ocean. Over 500 monumental statues, coins, jewelry, and ritual objects of inestimable historic value from the period of 700 before to 800 after Christ were recovered. After spectacular exhibitions in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and Japan, a large number of the exhibits have traveled through the United States. The exhibit is called Cleopatra, the Search for the Last Queen of Egypt, and the exhibition stopped in Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and Los Angeles. Second example, the Hilty Family Trust has been supporting the Simon Bolivar Youth Symphony Orchestra from Venezuela with its remarkable conductor, Gustavo Dudamel, for more than 3 years. As one of the main sponsors, the Hilty Family Trust has contributed to improve the expertise of the orchestra by donating high-quality concert instruments and by sponsoring tours. Last example, since 2006, the Hilty Family Trust has supported Physicians for Human Rights Israel. This organization uses donations to finance so-called mobile clinics, a unique joint project run by Israeli and Palestinian medical doctors. Last year, more than 10,000 patients in the occupied territories were given medical treatment with the help of about 600 physicians. Well, these examples of soft power use conclude my presentation. I hope I was able to convey to you that there are many forms of cultural diplomacy and that a small country is particularly challenged to be innovative in their choice and application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Ambassador Fritsche, for some very interesting perspectives, in particular, as you said, from a small country. We began the day with some American representatives talking about, of course, a very big country and the strategies, so I think it's great that we could really zoom in on also how a small country really sees these issues. We had this debate earlier today, is this just for the big guys with all of the resources, or can also the small countries actually engage in cultural diplomacy? I would argue for a small country it's even more important to engage in cultural diplomacy, because they may not have the hard power, resources, or capabilities of some of the others. So just to underline the point. So no, thank you very much for the lecture. We now would be very happy to take your questions and comments. We'll start here in the front row, please.
I will start by changing my position or statement about smart power. It doesn't apply to Liechtenstein because I know it's a very powerful country, economically speaking. I spent 3 weeks in Liechtenstein in 1988, which brings me to this question. From Italy, when I was a student there, I applied for a visa for that summer program in Liechtenstein. And the visa for Liechtenstein was issued by the embassy of Switzerland in Italy. I was wondering why that, in light of that country's or principality's sovereignty. Why Swiss? Visa
There has been,
to go to Liechtenstein.
well, maybe just the facts about our foreign service. Today, Liechtenstein has about 30 diplomats. That includes everybody abroad. We maintain 8 diplomatic representations, 6 of them in Europe, plus the mission to the United Nations in New York, plus the embassy in Washington. In the rest of the world, on the basis of an agreement that we have with Switzerland, they represent our consular interests wherever they have a representation and we don't. And that is pretty much the rest of the world. This will not change. We are very, very grateful to our neighbor to assume that task on our behalf. We could never, ever, ever attempt to maintain our own consulates. What we have started to do is something that many other countries have practiced for many, many years. We have started to appoint honorary consuls. We have 4 in the United States and 2 in Germany. And those honorary consuls, they really, really support the embassy tremendously with public outreach, public diplomacy. But they do not do professional consular work. That is still done by the Swiss consulates, and it is something that we hope that Switzerland never considers changing, because we would be in deep trouble.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, well, in that case, let's please take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to Her Excellency, Ambassador Fritsche. Thank you very, very much.